When you think of stealing, you also think of getting away with stealing. The two ideas generally go hand in hand with one another. This usually means that people tend to consider stealing smaller scale items, like a chocolate bar, or something that's easily taken with them, like a car. However, there are always the few of us who tend to think on a larger scale, which is usually a good thing. Unfortunately, thinking large scales doesn't always involve a supervillain in a government takeover or a criminal mastermind pulling off the best bank robbery of all time. Sometimes bigger takes on its literal form, and this results in large items, far beyond anything you can simply slip into your pocket, suddenly disappearing. Let's take a look at some of the biggest things that have ever been stolen and the stories behind them. Bare Bones Operation. 8 years ago, the skull of a Tyrannosaurus bataar was the star artifact in a natural history-themed luxury auction in Manhattan. It sold for $276,000 to an anonymous buyer. As it turns out, the skull had been stolen from the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, and the buyer was Nicolas Cage, an actor who among his dozens of films has starred in a movie franchise about the hunt for rare treasures. A publicist for Mr. Cage confirmed that he bought the skull from the Beverly Hills Gallery IM Chait in 2007. The Department of Homeland Security contacted Mr. Cage about the skull last year, and the actor agreed to turn it over. Since 2012, the Office of Preet Bharara, the United States Attorney in Manhattan, has worked to return artifacts taken from Mongolia. Many stolen remains have been traced to a Florida man named Eric Prokopi, who in 2012 was arrested and charged with smuggling illegal goods and possessing stolen property. As a result, Prokopi was sentenced to 3 months in prison. Easy air miles. Disappearing big planes are rare events. Most of us are familiar with the mystery of MH370. But sometimes, the disappearance of a big passenger jet flies under the public radar. That's the case with a Boeing 727-200 that departed from Luanda's Quatro de Fevereiro Airport 18 years ago. The Boeing took off late one afternoon and was never seen again. This is no ordinary disappearance. There are layers of complexity here. The Boeing 727-200, registration N844A, was leased to TAG Angola Airlines but was grounded at the time owing to unpaid airport fees and other disputes. The men who took the plane were not certified to fly it. It was a rough and wild flying environment with poor regulatory oversight. After the disappearance, Boeing was considered stolen. The FBI and CIA were involved in the follow-up investigation. But even those well-resourced organizations found no trace of N844A. By the time the plane disappeared, rough treatment had severely degraded it, but the engines were considered sound. The morning after N844A mysteriously took off, alarm bells started ringing. It wasn't automatically assumed the plane had crashed. There are a lot of long unpaved runways in sub-Saharan Africa that could accommodate a Boeing 727. Theft and insurance fraud were considered. But a Boeing 727 is kind of hard to disappear long-term. Planes are not much use unless you can fly them, and there have been no ongoing reports of mystery Boeing 727s flying around Africa. 18 years down the track, most people connected with the plane, lessors, pilots, U.S. government officials, debtors, and other stakeholders, think the plane crashed in the ocean. But with no trace ever found, the true fate of N844A remains an enduring mystery. Enlightened by thieves. In 2005, monks at the Buddhist monastery in Tacoma, Washington, entered a deep meditation and emerged to a surprising loss. A 3,000-pound bell had been stolen. The bell was so large that police think it must have been removed with a forklift, according to Reader's Digest. The bell was placed in a hand-carved wooden frame and hung in an open-sided meditation pavilion, the Associated Press reported at the time. Both the bell and the frame were stolen. When the bell was first stolen, Temple Abbot Tet Fuatoan told that he was not very hopeful it would be found. Fortunately, he was proven wrong a year later. The recovery began when a man purchased a storage unit in Puyallup, Washington. A second man named Robert L. Hunter approached him and said the unit's contents all belonged to him, and he would pay him more than $500 for them. The man refused and instead informed a Department of Fish and Wildlife officer on November 20, 2006. The bell was recovered from the storage unit and returned to the temple. Eventually, Hunter was arrested, and even more stolen items were recovered from his property, including 6 cars, 2 tow trucks, a tractor, and some guns. The bell itself was returned undamaged, but the wooden frame containing it was and had to be repaired before the bell could be used in ceremonies again. Brick by brick blasphemy. Wanted, one missing Russian church. Orthodox priest Vitaly of the Ivanovo-Voskresensky diocese said officials last saw the 2-story Church of Resurrection intact in late July. Sometime in early October, however, people from the nearby village of Komarovo, northeast of Moscow, dismantled the building, he said. Villagers sold it to a local businessman, 1 ruble, about 4 cents, per brick, Vitaly said. Orthodox priests use only one name. Of course, this is blasphemy, he said. These people have to realize they committed a grave sin. The 200-year-old building, which no longer had its icons and other religious valuables, was a school for disabled children during the Soviet era before it was closed down in 1998 and turned over to the church. Crime of the Ken tree. Stealing a tree is never an easy task. But if this perplexing case from 2012 is anything to go by, the older the tree, the harder it is to steal. A decade ago, British Columbia had 40 full-time park rangers who monitored 1,000 parks. Today, it only has 10. And they don't often make it out to faraway parks like the Carmanah-Walbran Provincial Park, which is on the southern end of Vancouver Island. With no one around regularly, it must have been easy for poachers to come into the park and hack away at an 800-year-old red cedar tree. Well, easy is relative, because we're talking about a lot of sawing. This granddaddy cedar was so old, its stump measures almost 10 feet in diameter. But there was so little supervision of the park that the tree thieves could return multiple times to hack at the tree and then haul sections of it away. Aside from being ethically monstrous, it's kind of the perfect crime. Cedar's valuable. A truckload of the stuff could be worth thousands of dollars. And there's no chance the perpetrators will be caught, even though they're real. A bridge too far. Some people build bridges. Others burn them. In rare cases, some steal them. It was not one of David Copperfield's conjuring acts, but a heist involving the disappearance of a 100-year-old stone bridge in Zhejiang province. Villagers were shocked when the bridge vanished overnight last month. The culprit, as it turned out, was a man looking to trade the stones for cash and was identified by police by his last name Chen. Part of a Qing dynasty, 1644 to 1911, stone bridge in suburban Shanghai was stolen overnight and sold to a garden company in a neighboring province for 30,000 yuan, $4,761. The Fengla Bridge was a 17-meter-long beam bridge more than 100 years old. The city listed it as a protected cultural relic in 2008. The 16 granite boards on the deck were missing one morning in November and only 4 piers were left. A suspect surnamed Hong from Anhui province counterfeited a letter from the local Cultural Relics Protection Authority to sell part of the bridge for 30,000 yuan to the other suspect, surnamed Wang and also from Anhui, in September that year. A history of crime. A World War II Mustang fighter plane, which gave valuable service to the Israel Air Force until it was retired 25 years ago, eventually will be returned to the Air Force Museum, but not before the man who stole it goes to jail. Air Force Reserve Major Ari Yitzhaki was found guilty by the Tel Aviv District Court on Thursday of purloining the vintage aircraft and selling it in Sweden. After spending time restoring it, he flew it secretly to Sweden, where he illegally sold the antique for $331,000. The Swedish company that bought it flew the combat plane for the last 6 years, though the purpose was not made clear. The Israeli authorities eventually traced their missing aircraft through Interpol, the International Criminal Information Clearinghouse. But extensive legal procedures will be necessary before it can be returned. Who wouldn't steal a ship? Pirates have hijacked an oil tanker with 8 Sri Lankan crew on board, Somali authorities said on Tuesday, the first time a commercial ship has been seized in the region since 2012. The Rs-13 reported being approached by 2 skiffs. The ship had been carrying fuel from Djibouti to Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. 8 Sri Lankan crew members were reported aboard. A Somali official said at least 24 men boarded the ship off Somalia's northern coast, an area known to be used by armed smugglers and members of the al-Qaeda-linked extremist group al-Shabaab. Piracy off Somalia's coast was once a serious threat to the global shipping industry. It has lessened in recent years after an international effort to patrol near the country, whose weak central government has been trying to assert itself after a quarter-century of conflict. Somali pirates usually hijack ships and crew for ransom. They don't normally kill hostages unless they come under attack, including during rescue attempts. Fortunately later, Somali pirates who hijacked an oil tanker have released it without condition, according to officials. The announcement came hours after the pirates and naval forces exchanged gunfire over a boat believed to be carrying supplies to the hijackers. The USA's underwater heist. At the height of the Cold War, using eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes for cover, the CIA spent $350 million trying to steal a Soviet submarine. In a corner exhibit of the recently reopened International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., a submarine control panel, a swoopy banged wig, detailed white prints, and a chunk of manganese are on display. Together, they represent relics of a Cold War espionage mission so audacious, the museum's curator, Vince Houghton, compares it to the heist from Ocean's 11. This mission, codenamed Project Azorian, involved the CIA commissioning the construction of a 600-foot ship to retrieve a sunken Soviet submarine from the ocean floor, all in complete secrecy. The 6-year mission began in 1968 when the Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-129 went missing without explanation somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. In this post-Cuban Missile Crisis era, both American and Soviet submarines prowled the open seas with nuclear weapons aboard, prepared for potential war. Some reports indicate that the sinking was due to a mechanical error such as inadvertent missile engine ignition, while the Soviets for a time suspected the Americans of foul play. After 2 months, the Soviet Union abandoned its search for K-129 and the nuclear weapons it carried, but the United States, which had recently used Air Force technology to locate 2 of its sunken submarines, pinpointed the K-129 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii and 16,500 feet below the surface. That summer, Project Azorian finally completed the lift of the K-129. The specs for the Hughes Glomar Explorer needed a lot of explaining. The ship had to be massive enough to pick up 3.92 million pounds, lift it more than 3 miles, then carry it home undetected. Record-breaking egg hat. Greg Da Silva is on edge after having his world record-breaking hat, which features 1,000 eggs, stolen while in Germany. Mr. Da Silva was suffering from heatstroke while in the city of Halle when an egg snatcher made off with a hard-boiled hat. After he had recovered from his heatstroke, Mr. Da Silva went to retrieve the hat from the hospital, but he was left scrambled when he found it was missing. Mr. Da Silva is based in Cape Town, South Africa, and has been performing there for years. He was nominated in the category Biggest Egg Hat in the World in 2011, although, until now, we weren't aware this category existed. Mr. Da Silva originally studied computer science but gave it up to pursue political, comic, and poetic theater. Extraordinary. Giant inflatable gorilla. Has anyone seen a 12-foot tall inflatable gorilla rocking white sunglasses, red shorts, a big smile, and is hoisting a car above its head? No? Neither has the Corpus Christi police, who are on the hunt for the miscreants who stole the massive display from a local car dealership earlier in 2017. Surveillance footage caught multiple suspects taking the gorilla down, cutting its cords, and carrying off the accompanying air pump Sunday morning between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. from a local Fiat dealership, said Senior Officer Travis Pace. The gorilla, which does not have a name, is valued at roughly $10,000. A mountain of crime. As far as earthly objects go, things don't get much bigger than mountains. So for thieves that take the phrase "go bigger or go home" a little too seriously, stealing a mountain is the logical conclusion. Locals from the Humpta village in Jharkhand, eastern India, are slowly but surely bringing the aforementioned phrase alive by stealing the peak of the nearby mountain called Humpta Pahad. But how possible is that? I can hear you ask. Locals chip away the rocks to sell to property developers and use their earnings to feed their families. The village doesn't have much else in terms of industry. So people work 11 hours a day, hewing the peak of the mountain from the topmost into a stub. The local authorities tend to turn a blind eye as the mountain is one of the few sources of work in the area. A local businessman has laid claim of ownership of the mountain in an attempt to remove the criminal edge from the operation. But the authenticity of the claim is questionable at best. Unless something changes, the locals would eventually steal the entire mountain. Which heist impressed or shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments section. Thanks for watching.